In the rolling hills of a forgotten countryside, where dreams often withered under the harsh sun, lived a farmer whose hands were as calloused as his spirit was weary. Each morning, he would rise before dawn, his body aching from years of toil on land that gave back barely enough to survive. His neighbors pitied him, his friends had long abandoned him, and the local moneylender circled like a vulture waiting for the final collapse. It was on a particularly desperate day when the last of his savings had been counted and found wanting that fate intervened in the form of a horse nobody wanted. The animal stood awkwardly at the back of the auction pen, ribs visible through its dull coat, one eye clouded, and a distinct limp in its gait. When not a single bid came forward, the auctioneer had nearly given the horse away for slaughter. Something about the animal's dignified stance, despite its sorry state, stirred something in the farmer's heart. "I'll take him," he had said, even as laughter rippled through the crowd. What can a man with nothing lose by befriending another rejected soul? What followed this simple act of compassion would become the stuff of local legend. Against all advice and common sense, the farmer nursed the horse back to health, spending precious resources on an animal others deemed worthless. His wife worried, his few remaining friends shook their heads in dismay. "That broken creature will be the final nail in your coffin," warned the village elder, a man whose opinions carried the weight of supposed wisdom. Some things are beyond saving. But in the quiet evenings, as the farmer brushed the horse's gradually brightening coat, he whispered stories of better days to come. And strangely, as weeks passed, the horse seemed to listen, its damaged eye focusing on him with an intelligence that sometimes sent shivers down his spine. Then came the spring rains, heavier than anyone had seen in decades. Fields flooded, roads washed away, and panic spread through the village. It was during this chaos that the farmer noticed something odd about his rehabilitated companion. The horse became agitated, pawing at a specific patch of newly exposed soil on the farmer's worthless land. "What is it, old friend?" the farmer had asked, trudging through mud to investigate. What his hands unearthed from that muddy patch would change everything. As thunder rolled overhead and rain pelted his bent back, the farmer's fingers closed around something buried long ago. His breath caught in his throat as realization dawned. Little did he know that this discovery, this secret the unwanted horse had somehow led him to, would transform him from the village's poorest soul to a man of means beyond imagination. And little did he understand that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary partnership that would test the limits of belief, loyalty, and what it truly means to see value in the things others throw away. The rain continued to pour as the farmer's trembling hands brushed away the mud. There, glinting in the dim light of approaching dusk, was a small metal box. Ancient and corroded, yet its lock remained intact. The horse nickered softly, nudging the farmer's shoulder as if urging him to take it home. That night, after struggling with the rusted lock for hours, the farmer finally pried it open. Inside lay a yellowed map, its edges crumbling with age, and a single gold coin unlike any he'd ever seen. Strange markings covered both items, symbols from a time long forgotten. The farmer's wife gasped when she saw the coin. "Where did you find this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm that continued to rage outside. "The horse," he replied simply. He knew it was there. The following morning, the farmer visited the town's old schoolteacher, a woman whose knowledge of history was respected throughout the region. Her eyes widened when she saw the coin and map. "This," she said, running her fingers over the tarnished gold, "is from the lost caravan of 1817. A merchant convoy carrying treasures from the east disappeared in these hills during a terrible storm. Many searched, but nothing was ever found." She studied the map carefully. "And this could lead to where the rest of it is hidden." Word spread quickly through the village. Soon, the farmer found himself being courted by men of influence who had never before given him the time of day. The bank manager who had denied him loans now offered generous terms. The wealthy landowner who had once tried to force him off his property now proposed a partnership. But something about their sudden interest didn't sit right with the farmer. The way they looked at his horse with calculation rather than compassion made him uneasy. And at night, he noticed strangers watching his property from the road. The schoolteacher had warned him to be careful. Men have killed for less than what you might find, she had said. History is full of treasure hunts that ended in betrayal. Instead of sharing his plans, the farmer began studying the map in secret. Each night, after his wife had gone to bed, he would sit with the horse, tracing the lines on the parchment. Strangely, the animal seemed to understand, reacting to specific areas with unusual interest. One particular spot on the map, marked with a symbol resembling a crooked tree, made the horse especially agitated. That area was deep in the forest that bordered the farmer's land, a place locals avoided due to legends of strange occurrences and lost travelers. Despite growing fears, the farmer knew he had to investigate. With spring planting delayed by the floods, he had a small window of opportunity. Before dawn one morning, he saddled the horse and packed basic supplies. His wife watched with worry in her eyes. "Be careful," she said, pressing a small family heirloom into his palm, a pendant that had belonged to her grandmother. "For protection," she added softly. The journey into the forest was arduous. Paths that had existed for generations were now altered by the floods, and landmarks had shifted or disappeared entirely. But the horse moved with unexpected confidence, picking its way through the changed landscape as if guided by some unseen force. By midday, the farmer began to notice odd stone formations half buried in the earth. Ancient, weathered by centuries, yet clearly placed by human hands. The horse grew increasingly animated, moving with purpose toward a steep hillside where a massive boulder seemed to have recently shifted position. As they approached, the farmer's heart began to race. Carved into the rock face, partially exposed by the recent landslide, was the exact symbol from the map, the crooked tree. And beside it, barely visible in the slanting sunlight, was the unmistakable outline of a door. The farmer stood frozen before the stone door, his breath visible in the suddenly cool air. The horse pawed at the ground impatiently, as if understanding the significance of this moment far better than its human companion. With trembling hands, the farmer traced the symbol of the crooked tree etched into the rock. A voice startled him from behind. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The farmer whirled around to find himself face to face with the town's wealthiest merchant, a man who had built his fortune buying up failed farms, just like the one the farmer was struggling to keep. Behind him stood two hired men, their expressions hard and unreadable. "These hills have many secrets," the merchant continued, his voice falsely pleasant. "Some best left undisturbed. Why don't you hand over that map, and we can forget this foolishness?" The farmer's hand instinctively went to his pocket where the map lay folded. "How did you find me?" The merchant smiled coldly. "Your wife told me, of course." "Sweet woman. Concerned for your safety out here alone. She doesn't know what you've really found, does she?" A chill ran down the farmer's spine. Something in the merchant's tone suggested a threat that went beyond mere words. The horse sensed the tension, positioning itself between the farmer and the newcomers. "I'll give you until sundown to reconsider," the merchant said, turning to leave. "After that, well, accidents happen in these woods all the time." Once alone again, the farmer leaned against the stone door, his mind racing. He had come too far to turn back, yet the danger was clearer than ever. As he pressed his palm against the ancient rock in frustration, something unexpected happened. The door shifted slightly, revealing a small opening. Without hesitation, the farmer squeezed through, the horse somehow managing to follow despite its size. Inside, they found themselves in a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. Using the small lantern he'd brought, the farmer pressed forward, the air growing increasingly stale as they descended. Meanwhile, back at the farm, the farmer's wife paced anxiously. She hadn't trusted the merchant. Something about his questions had seemed wrong. When he'd pressed for details about the map and her husband's whereabouts, she had deliberately misled him, sending him to the eastern part of the forest while her husband had gone west. Now, she watched from the window as strangers circled their property like vultures. The schoolteacher had arrived an hour earlier, bringing troubling news. "The merchant has been searching for the lost caravan for years," the elderly woman explained. "His grandfather was one of the merchants who sent that convoy. He believes it's his birthright." "But why now?" the wife asked. "That treasure has been lost for generations." The schoolteacher shook her head. Because your husband has something no one else ever found to guide. The map? No, the teacher replied. The horse. Deep in the underground passage, the farmer had made a discovery that confirmed this strange truth. The tunnel opened into a small chamber where ancient torches somehow still burned, illuminating walls covered in paintings. They depicted horses guiding humans to hidden treasures, horses with special markings identical to the one walking beside him now. One painting showed a horse with a clouded eye standing before a doorway marked with 3 vertical lines. The farmer turned to his companion in shock. The horse immediately moved to the far wall of the chamber, where those exact 3 lines were carved into the stone. "You've been here before," the farmer whispered. "Or your ancestors have." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling as the entire chamber shook. The horse whinnied urgently, pushing the farmer toward the marked wall. Without understanding why, the farmer pressed his hand against the 3 lines. The wall slid open to reveal another passage just as the chamber behind them began to collapse. "Someone's triggered a trap," the farmer gasped, rushing through the opening with the horse close behind. They emerged into a vast underground cavern, and what the farmer saw there took his breath away. Stacks of ancient crates and chests, wagons still loaded with goods, and the skeletal remains of those who had brought them here. They had found the lost caravan preserved in this hidden space for over a century. But his wonder quickly turned to horror as he realized the truth. The collapsing tunnel behind them was no accident. The merchant had not been fooled by his wife's misdirection. And now, as the sound of falling rocks gave way to approaching footsteps, the farmer knew they were not alone in this underground treasure chamber. The horse nudged a particular chest, pawing at it urgently. The farmer opened it to find something far more valuable than gold, a journal, detailing the true purpose of the caravan and a secret that had been worth killing for generations ago. As the farmer read the first page, his blood ran cold. This was bigger than treasure. This was about— "Put it down," came the merchant's voice, now echoing through the cavern. "Some knowledge is more dangerous than any treasure." The farmer looked up to see the merchant standing at the entrance to the cavern, a loaded pistol in his hand, pointed directly at the horse's head. The cavern fell silent, except for the dripping of water from stalactites above. The farmer's hand trembled as he held the journal, its leather cover worn with age. The merchant's pistol remained steady, aimed at the horse that had led them all here. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into," the merchant said, his voice echoing against the stone walls. "That journal contained secrets that have been buried for good reason." The farmer glanced down at the open page, catching glimpses of handwritten text about the ancient bloodline and guardians of the passage. His horse, his loyal, rejected companion, stood perfectly still, its cloudy eye fixed on the merchant with unnerving intelligence. "This isn't about gold, is it?" the farmer asked, suddenly understanding. It never was. The merchant's face tightened. "My grandfather wasn't just a merchant. He was the keeper of a secret that goes back centuries. Those horses," he gestured toward the animal with his pistol, "they're not normal. They're descended from the guardians, bred to protect and guide. My family has spent generations trying to find this place, to recover what was lost." From the shadows behind the merchant emerged his 2 men, now joined by 3 more. They spread out, surrounding the farmer and his horse. "Your poor rejected animal was the key all along," the merchant continued. "Born with the sight, marked by the clouded eye. We've been watching you since the auction, waiting to see if the horse would reveal itself." Outside the cavern, in the deepening twilight of the forest, the farmer's wife followed the faint tracks her husband had left. The schoolteacher had insisted on accompanying her, bringing along an old box of her own, one that had been passed down through her family for generations. "My grandmother was the keeper of stories," the schoolteacher explained as they moved cautiously through the trees. "She told me about the guardian horses and the treasure they protected. But the treasure wasn't gold or jewels. It was knowledge, ancient wisdom that could change everything." Back in the cavern, the farmer's mind raced. The merchant's men were closing in slowly, their intentions clear. The horse nudged the farmer gently, pushing him toward a narrow crevice in the wall behind them. "Don't move!" The merchant barked, noticing the subtle movement. "The journal belongs to my family. It's our birthright." The farmer's fingers traced the edges of the weathered pages. If that's true, why did the horse choose me? Why did it lead me here instead of you? A flicker of doubt crossed the merchant's face. An accident of fate. Nothing more. No, came a voice from the entrance to the cavern. The farmer's wife stepped into view, the schoolteacher beside her. It was no accident. The merchant whirled around, momentarily distracted. His men hesitated, unsure of this new development. The schoolteacher opened the box she carried, revealing an amulet identical to the one seen in the paintings on the chamber walls. The guardians choose their companions carefully, she said. They sense something in the heart that wealth and power can never buy. The merchant's face contorted with rage. Enough of this nonsense. He turned back to the farmer, his pistol now aimed at the man's chest. Give me the journal, or I'll take it from your body. In that moment, the horse moved with startling speed for an animal once considered lame and worthless. It positioned itself between the farmer and the merchant, its eyes both the clear and the clouded glowing with an unearthly light. The cavern began to tremble again, more violently this time. Dust and small rocks rained down from above. The merchant's men backed away, fear replacing their earlier confidence. What's happening? One of them shouted above the growing rumble. The schoolteacher held up the amulet, which now pulsed with the same light as the horse's eyes. The final test, she said simply. The farmer felt the journal grow warm in his hands. As he opened it fully, the pages began to glow, illuminating text that hadn't been visible before. Ancient symbols, matching those on the coin and map, appeared before his eyes. Read it. His wife called out, It's choosing you. The merchant lunged forward in desperation, but the ground split between him and the farmer, creating an impassable chasm. No, he screamed, his family's generations-long quest crumbling before his eyes. The farmer looked down at the glowing text, words in a language he somehow understood despite never having seen it before. As he began to read aloud, the horse's markings previously hidden beneath its coat began to shine through its skin like constellations. The cavern's shaking intensified. Larger rocks began to fall as the entire structure threatened to collapse. The merchant's men fled, dragging their unwilling leader with them. We have to leave too, the farmer's wife urged, reaching for her husband's arm. The farmer looked at her, then at the horse, torn between escape and completing what had been started. The journal in his hands burned brighter, the words compelling him to continue reading. Trust the guardian, the schoolteacher said, her voice steady despite the chaos. There's more at stake than you know. As the exit to the cavern collapsed behind them, sealing them in, the farmer made his choice. He turned to the final page of the journal and read the last passage aloud. The horse reared up on its hind legs, its front hooves striking the cavern floor with tremendous force. The ground beneath them gave way, and they began to fall into a blinding light that erupted from below. The farmer clutched the journal to his chest, his wife's hand in his, the schoolteacher beside them, and the horse somehow surrounding them all as they plunged into the unknown. The last thing the farmer saw before the light engulfed them completely was a vast chamber below, filled with riches beyond imagination, not just gold and jewels, but scrolls and artifacts from a civilization long forgotten. And standing guard around this treasure were stone statues of horses, each bearing the same markings as his own companion. As they descended into the heart of the ancient treasury, the farmer realized that his life as he knew it was over. Whatever awaited them in that gleaming chamber would transform not just his fortune, but his understanding of the world itself. The blinding light faded slowly, revealing not destruction but transformation. The farmer, his wife, the schoolteacher, and the horse stood unharmed in the center of the vast underground treasury. Ancient knowledge surrounded them, scrolls and tablets containing forgotten wisdom about healing, farming, and living in harmony with the earth. The guardians don't protect wealth, the schoolteacher whispered in awe. They protect knowledge that could heal the world. Over the next few days, they carefully studied the journals and brought select items to the surface. The merchant, humbled by what he'd witnessed, approached them not as an enemy, but as a man seeking redemption. My family misunderstood our purpose for generations, he admitted. We were never meant to own this knowledge, only to help protect it. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance. The farmer's worthless land, chosen deliberately by the horse, became the site of an extraordinary transformation. Using the ancient agricultural techniques detailed in the scrolls, barren soil turned fertile. Plants thought impossible to grow in their region flourished. The farmer's once rejected fields became living proof of the treasury's true value. Word spread. People came from neighboring villages to see the miracle farm. The farmer shared what he'd learned freely, teaching sustainable methods that had been lost to time. His wife established a school where the ancient knowledge of healing plants and natural remedies was taught. The merchant funded it all, finding greater satisfaction in sharing wealth than hoarding it. My grandfather would have understood eventually, he often said, watching children learn in the schoolhouse built on the farmer's land. The horse, the guardian that had changed everything, lived out its days in peace, watched over by a new generation of special foals born with the same clouded eye. They roamed the farm freely, sometimes guiding visitors to specific plants when they were most needed. 5 years after that fateful day in the cavern, the farmer stood on a hillside overlooking his land. Where poverty had once reigned, abundance now flourished. Families moved to the area, building a community centered around learning and growing together. The wealth he'd found wasn't measured in gold, but in the richness of the life they'd created. "You knew all along, didn't you?" he said to the horse beside him, its coat now silver with age. "That the real treasure was what we could build together." The horse nudged his hand gently, wisdom in its mismatched eyes. That evening, as the community gathered for their harvest celebration, the farmer addressed them all. "I was once the poorest man in the village," he said, "with nothing but a piece of land nobody wanted and a horse everyone had rejected. Now I consider myself the wealthiest man alive." He looked around at the thriving community, the healthy children, the abundant fields. True wealth isn't what you keep locked away, it's what you nurture and share. The old schoolteacher, now surrounded by young apprentices, smiled knowingly. The ancient scrolls had predicted this. When the right heart found the guardian, the circle would be complete, and healing would begin again. As night fell, the farmer watched his once rejected horse standing proud beneath the stars, its coat shimmering with the same pattern as the constellations above. Some treasures, he had learned, choose their keepers, and sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones others have thrown away.